Welcome to the Balance Protocol podcast. If you are looking to regain your health, get the most out of life, or even resolve a chronic disease that has been plaguing you for years, this is the place. During an era where countless people are feeling the weight of ill health and whose heads are spinning due to all the noise and confusion within the info space, Dr. Beck is here to cut through all that noise and misinformation, to bridge the gap between medicine, scientific research, and where everything should truly be centered within you. Backed with 2 decades of professional clinical experience, Dr. Beck applies a revolutionary systems biology called functional medicine, utilizing his powerful method called the Balance Protocol. Here, Dr. Beck will educate you on the root causes of disease, motivate you to take solid corrective actions in your life, and inspire you to reach the highest levels of well-being. He knows that at the end of the day, it is you, the patient, who holds the keys to your ultimate health and well-being. It's time for the Balance Protocol with Dr. Anthony G. Beck.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Balance Protocol podcast. I'm Dr. Anthony G. Beck, and today of course I'm super excited to share with you my program called the Balance Protocol. In today's show I'm going to give you the history behind the Balance Protocol and how it came to be, why the Balance Protocol is so dynamically different than other healthcare programs. And I'm going to introduce you to the backbone of the Balance Protocol called the 2-3-5-8 framework. And I'm going to show you how to apply the principles and methods of the Balance Protocol in your life so you can reach the highest levels of well-being designed specifically for you. You know, our thinking about how we get sick is completely wrong. You can't catch a disease, and you can't catch cancer or heart disease, insomnia, or even depression. These aren't things that just by the luck of the draw came out of randomness and you can just, accept that stamp of diagnosis on your forehead. There are solid reasons why you have these dysfunctions that we actually call disease. Our medical system is based on the idea that diseases just show up like an unwanted visitor, that it's unpredictable, or just because it runs in the family, you have a high chance of getting something or catching it. This may have seemed true 150 years ago when Louis Pasteur came up with the germ theory of disease and felt that there were germs out there and some people by a stroke of bad luck just caught them. There wasn't much you could do except hope that that germ or disease didn't show up on your doorstep. Then we found a drug for every bug. A drug for the bug and antibiotics. And lo and behold, modern medicine could finally do something about disease. And in the last 70 years since the discovery of antibiotics, we've been on a relentless search for a drug for every bug, a pill for every ill. The problem is, this completely ignores the real cause of disease. The only way to get to the root cause of disease is to understand your personal environment, which is your eating habits, stress that you might be subjected to, exercise or not exercise, things like radiation, trauma, toxins in the food, air, and water, how all these interact with your genes to determine your state of health or disease. So what can you do? Well, your genes are fixed. You can't change them. Now that's called your genotype. But you can change which genes get turned on or off and how that affects your physiology by changing those things that can affect and trigger your genes' actions of expression. Your environment interacting with your genes creates who you are at this particular moment. This is called your phenotype. And that you can change. Every environmental input, from diet to toxins to stress, all determine the healthiness of your body. It's like preparing healthy soil for plants. To have vibrant growth, you must mix the right amount of organic matter, the right pH balance in the soil, the right amount of nutrients, water, light, and air, as well as safeguard it from harmful chemicals and organisms. Our bodies are very much the same way. We need to have a healthy soil in order to be healthy. In fact, Louis Pasteur on his deathbed realized this. It's the terrain, not the germ, that's the most important determinant of health. This explains why giving something as simple that we found out many years ago Zinc to a malnourished child in a third world can dramatically reduce the death from infections by over 75%. Something as simple as a single mineral. It doesn't stop exposure to bugs, but zinc boosts immunity and helps those children stay healthy. So by believing in this germ theory of disease, medicine has ignored one of the most important scientific ideas of the last century, that our health is determined by the interaction of our genes and our environment. There was an article called Diet, Lifestyle, and Longevity, The Next Steps, and this was back in the September 2004 Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA. And in there, two leading Harvard epidemiologists, Rim and Stamfer, both agreed. And they said that the benefits of studying and addressing fundamental dietary, lifestyle, and environmental factors is more effective and economically sound than trying to find the latest drug or surgical treatment for chronic disease. And as a society, the United States spends billions upon billions on chronic disease treatments and interventions for risk factors. Although these are useful and important, just a fraction of that investment to promote healthful lifestyles for individuals of all ages would yield a much greater benefit. So simply looking at what we put in and around our bodies every day would be more effective and much less expensive. Since the leading causes of death are heart disease, about 600,000 deaths per year, and cancer, another 600,000 deaths per year. These are, of course, followed by things like respiratory diseases, liver disease from alcohol consumption, and toxins, car accidents, sexual behaviors, and use of illicit drugs, as we go down the line there. We have volumes of proven empirical data that all of these have major contributions coming from personal lifestyle decisions. So that's where we should put our efforts as individuals and as a society. We certainly can't continue to just treat symptoms of these things with drugs to suppress them or just surgically remove body parts as they fail to function because of them. Now, I can understand that the information I will provide will seem a bit overwhelming, but you can understand it. Once you do, it will completely change your perception of the whole role of food and nutrients, as well as the impact your lifestyle choices have on your physical and mental health forever. This background knowledge will help you take full advantage of the balance protocol. If you know what is happening in the body, why it goes wrong, and how to fix it, you're much more likely to incorporate changes in the way you eat, your behavior, and the habits in the long run. After all, it's my goal and life's passion to educate, motivate, and inspire you to do just that. The balance protocol is a one-of-a-kind clinical method, and it's designed to educate you on the true root causes of disease, motivate you to take solid corrections in your life, and inspire you to reach for the highest levels of well-being. It utilizes a science-based systems biology called functional medicine to provide a systematic approach to navigate you through the often complex puzzle of regaining your health and resolving chronic disease. The balance protocol, it empowers you with a step-by-step process to discover how you can uncover the true root causes of what's keeping you from a life of abundant health and vitality. No gimmicks, no quick fixes, solid information based upon clinical experience, scientific research, and experience from hearing the individual stories from just tens of thousands of patients over my 20 years in clinical practice. So when you apply these simple yet transformational actions in your lifestyle, your eating, and the environment you live in, you will find that you can just make unforetold, powerful changes in your health, and not getting caught up in the noise and confusion that's out there of all these different ways to just lose weight. I want to focus more on gaining health. And as you gain health and you become more solidly empowered and invested in you and accepting yourself as a very specific and individual and a category of one, you'll better understand how this is going to make a dynamic difference for you specifically in your health. The central theme to the balance protocol is the fact that each and every one of us is unique. That's the core principle that must be understood. Nobody can tell you how to eat because they don't know the specifics of your genes, your environment, where you came from, all the way back to when you were in the mother's womb. And so the answer relies tremendously on your genetic code, as well as all the things that you live in and around. I call these your environmental inputs. So let me say this, as we all know, there is a tremendous amount of contradictory or seemingly contradictory information out there on what is healthy and what's not healthy. Everyone telling you what is quote unquote good or quote unquote bad, stuff like that. They use absolute terms of that's unhealthy or that's healthy, that's good, that's bad. Well, here is the trouble and the challenge. So many are correct and so many are very incorrect. And that about solves it, right? Well, seriously though, the fact is that there's a virtual avalanche of health information out there. Some from highly educated clinicians, some from archived research that so many of us just don't know there is or how to find it or that we can get access to. And so much online comes from bloggers and self-proclaimed experts and coaches. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe a very simple and eloquent fact, and that's something my father taught me a long time ago, and that is the truth, no matter where it comes from. So I'm not saying that an individual who has a passion for something and creates a blog or becomes a coach doesn't know. But there is a dynamic difference between having firsthand clinical experience when it comes to resolving complex chronic diseases versus just trying to take some type of trick or tool or method to achieve a specific outcome, like to lose weight. So someone does not have to be a doctor to know certain health truths. Matter of fact, the vast majority of doctors don't know what is nor how to help patients truly have a powerful state of vitality. And we're going to learn more about this as we move forward in the podcast. I talk about the fact that today's medical system or conventional medicine is really designed around an acute care model. And we'll get more into that later. But when it comes to more complex, ongoing chronic situations that require more than 7.6 minutes that you can bill an insurance policy for in just one clinical complaint, you lack the methodology that's needed to really get to these levels of health and well-being that I'm inviting you to take part in. This is because physicians today are not trained, nor are they wired to do so. They practice this model that I call the name it, blame it, tame it game. So again, I'm going to cover this more specifically as we go forward, but it's really important to understand those two things right off the bat, that you're very unique and you're a one of a kind based upon your genetic makeup and your environment and your own specific history. And then number two, acute care is not the same thing as chronic care. So things that you might get like a cold or a flu that's passing is not the same thing as a complex autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis or diabetes, some things like that. So that brings us to the other sources that you get exposed to. So virtual online prattings is what I call it. And again, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great sources of information online for health topics. But, and this is a big but, what is missing is the knowledge of what and how it applies to you. Let me give you an example. There are all kinds of auto parts, fuel, modifications, tires, and all that kind of fun stuff, right? I'm a car guy. And well, those things exist, and there's a lot of high-tech and performance-based things. But how do all of them apply to your car? You see my point? If you're driving a family vehicle, an SUV or something like that, all those different types of parts and fuels and mods and different things like that aren't very applicable to that particular vehicle. So although there are tons of different diets and how-tos out there, we all know that we've tried stuff and it just didn't pan out. We read or we're told something and we try it, and bam, a big fat flop. Then we do the temporary give up and say, oh man, all that's just junk. Well, until we feel down on ourselves again and think we're too fat or have to finally do something. So what do? We look for or try some other weight loss or health trick again. Or what is popular today is, a biohack. This cycle is all too common and is and of itself the problem. People are told all kinds of things to do. However, they're not taught how to decipher the code that is you. The vast majority of information out there forgets to embrace the fact that we all have a unique, powerful difference of self. So for you to get the highest level of well-being, your key is to learn the process to find and determine that which is best for you. This is why my program is called the Balance Protocol. It's the framework to lead you through the process of discovering what is optimal for you. No one can tell you how to live your life. You have to take that journey of discovery, and the Balance Protocol will guide you to find the way. You can get educated, you can get motivated, and you can get inspired. Yet, you still have to do it. Often when I teach the Balance Protocol to people, they remark on how simple and obvious that it seemed. And they say, well, why didn't anyone ever explain it like that before? And I tell them, well, there's a large array of finger pointing that we can do, a big spectrum of actual reasons. But suffice it to say, the good news is it doesn't matter. When you apply the Balance Protocol into your life, you will naturally come to an understanding of why. You'll get why so many different programs that give these how-tos are trying to cover things that they're just not capable of doing, and that's your individual story, your genetic code, what you're willing to be able to do, what you have access to. So that's the reason why. And you're going to come to know that the answer to why is that rarely does anyone in the health field think of individuals as individuals. They just give the same exact advice to each and every person. Well, all that's changed now with the Balance Protocol. I knew when I developed this system that it was going to be simple to understand, easy to live, and yet be very powerfully life-changing. And so I'm going to share with you the principles of the Balance Protocol. One of the first principles is biochemical individuality based on genetic and environmental uniqueness, something I've already said a few times here. So according to the Balance Protocol perspective, it recognizes that each person is a unique individual with a singular genetic structure, a unique life story, and set of influences that make up their environment in which they live. The purpose of the Balance Protocol is to elicit and bring understanding to your own uniqueness. Your life's journey and experiences are the context to understand the complex processes where environment merges with your genetic inheritance. We've come to understand that our DNA does set boundaries on individual performance. However, the deterministic model of genetics breaks down, and research has demonstrated a certain plasticity or flexibility to genetic induction not anticipated in years prior. So important to living the Balance Protocol is the idea that lifestyle translates into quantifiable effects on health through the energetics of our biochemistry and genetics. These effects can lead to disease or they can promote health. And as we more fully understand the web-like interconnections between environment and genetic responses, we can develop individual programs that reliably reflect the unique needs of the individual. Another principle is the dynamic balance between internal and external factors. Important in the application of the Balance Protocol is the idea that lifestyle translates into quantifiable effects on health and disease through the energetics of biochemistry and genetics. Different activities as well as emotions, how we eat, if we exercise or not, things like joy, sorrow, love, all of these are integral to inducing the dynamic mix of chemical reactions inside the body that lead to the sum of experiences that we all identify as our lives. This combination of environmental effects it helps our genes express in a certain way, either turning genes on or off. And the body's biochemistry on a daily basis also plays into that. And we have a tremendous amount of control over that based upon the choices that we make on how we eat, rest, and move our bodies. It's what gives rise to symptoms of what we call aging and disease. Now, the conventional medical model has done an outstanding job at hoodwinking the population. It has convinced them that they are just the product of what is in their family history. So think about that. If you have a chronic disease and go seek care for it, how likely are you to get the good old token answer, it's genetics, or runs in the family? Well, did your doctor test your genetics? Or did they have you check some box or fill out an intake form that asked you about your family history? Most likely, you're the victim of the name it, blame it, tame it game. People go to seek care, they fill out a family history part of an intake form, and then a specialist who sees you for about 7.6 minutes goes right for the easy out. Boom, it's in the family. Such a cop-out. And now imagine that someone actually looked at your full life history and then combine that story with an understanding of what is going on in your environment right now. What has happened over the recent years that has possibly contributed to what you're experiencing. What's going on in your mindset now. It's critical for us all to come to embrace that we have a dynamic balance between our outside and inside factors. The next principle of the balance protocol is the web-like connections of physiological factors. So fundamental to the balance protocol is a profound awareness that there is an interaction among all systems of the body. One of the biggest mistakes that's prevalent today is thinking that our body parts are independent of each other. And so again, think for a minute. Why on earth do we treat disease with just organ-specific approaches? Why is it logical to treat allergies with drugs that block allergy reactions? Why treat fatigue with stimulants? Why treat immune dysfunction with immune suppressants? This is that tug of war that's going on, that most people get caught up in this loop of just getting that little white slip of paper that you get to take down to the drugstore on the corner and get that pill for every ill. So it's beyond me as to think that we have allowed those who give medical care to dish out this type of approach and allow it to be entrenched in our worldview. We've allowed our healthcare to become a huge battery of specialists. You have a doctor for each and every separate organ system of the body, and rarely do any of them talk to each other. Our system is for you to be the proverbial ping pong ball. The things that predispose each of us to possible dysfunction due to our genetic susceptibilities, we call these antecedents. We do have things that have occurred from the moment two cells came together from our mother and father, and they began to multiply, and genes began to replicate, and DNA produced certain reactions. So we definitely have some things that predispose us to certain possibilities, or these antecedents. However, sometimes a force of change, such as an allergen or a microbe, some chemical exposure, a drug, or emotional stress, might be strong enough to create a dysfunctional response. These forces we refer to as triggers. And then the patient's response to a trigger consists of a complex web-like domino effect, if you will, on biological systems through various inflammatory responses, and we call these mediators. So we take a look at these ATMs, or these antecedents, triggers, and mediators, to really understand the web-like connectivity of what's going on in our bodies. The balance protocol provides a turnkey approach to work through diagnosis and treatment protocols that you can incorporate to assess the unique risk factors present just by virtue of your DNA interacting with your lifestyle, diet, environment, and even your thoughts. Another principle, which is super important as well, of course, is the patient-centered versus disease-centered understanding. The individual, not the so-called disease, is the target and should be the target of resolution. It's sad to admit that we're in a state of affairs where the focus on the uniqueness of the individual has all but been lost, because disease and disease management has become such huge business, and the amount of people who are not healthy is so overwhelming. The medical market has been forced to respond with a quick lockdown type of approach. You come in and say, you've been conditioned to go in, hey doc, can you give me something for this? And of course, they want to abide that and they want to give you something for it. And the way the cost is oftentimes covered is not affording to a period of time longer than just a few minutes after you've been waiting in the lobby for hours that you've scheduled weeks in advance, and you only get to talk about one complaint, and there's no time to talk to you about stuff such as how are you eating, or what's in your environment, what you might be exposed to. The balance protocol views disease not as an enemy, and not even as an independent reality, actually. Not an enemy that we're going to grapple with, but as a manifestation of the breakdown of mechanisms that maintain control, resilience, and of course your balance. Dysfunction and disease are rarely organ specific. I've said this so many times, and rather they're an altered systemic pathological malfunction that requires an integrated model of therapeutic intervention. You have to look from a more global spectrum of the body. The balance protocol focuses on the interactions between the person and his or her internal and external environment, and the processes that can go awry in this relationship. The other edict, of course, or principle of the balance protocol is health is a positive vitality, not the absence of disease. So many people miss this. They think, well, I'm healthy because I don't have any disease. But then I ask them, well, do you wake up energized in the morning? Do you have plenty of abundant energy throughout your day? Do you get restful sleep? Is your skin healthy, rosy, and supple? Is your mind acute and sharp, right? So that's what a positive vitality, looks a little bit like. So today, medicine is at a crossroads. And although medicine's been very successful in contributing to the development of the science of acute disease diagnosis and the treatment of those diseases during the past 4 decades, it's not been very successful in promoting healthy aging or preventing chronic disease. In fact, it's actually failed pretty miserably and continues to fail miserably at chronic disease. The majority of us, we want to live a life full of energy and continue to be active regardless of our age. So this means that health must be viewed as a positive vitality, and certainly not defined by simply not having to manage a diagnosis. The challenge is that we live at what I call the speed of life in the world that we do today, and stresses that we could have once accommodated now, again, they exceed our resilience, and this results in health crisis. The key is to fortify ourselves with the proper amount of knowledge and apply our choices in such a way that gives us a full set of armor to our life. Now, earlier I explained how our current model of medicine ignores the real causes of disease. So now what I want to do is explain the 8 keys of the balance protocol. So we're going to get into that too. This revolutionary new way of thinking about health and disease will guide you towards something many people have given up on experiencing, and that is balance. When I work with my patients and friends and family, I always like to get started by asking them detailed questions about all their own individual story. Things like, what is the quality of what you're eating? Do you eat whole foods? Is it plant-based? Or are you following a disease-promoting standard American diet that makes you malnourished and retain a bunch of body fat and unable to self-repair, regulate, and heal? What are the stressors in your life, your relationships, work, societal pressures, family, money? Have you been exposed to toxins in the air or water or in food? Are these in some way disturbing the balance in your health? Have you experienced physical or psychological trauma? Do you misuse or underuse your body and not provide the regular benefits of moving, stretching, strengthening it? All these allow your organs and joints and muscles to function as they're designed. Another thing is of course, what is your history in your family? We do want to take and get some clues from what's going on in there. What's your history of using recreational drugs or past prescriptive medication history? These are the real factors that influence and affect every system, function, and process in the body. If you don't deal with them directly, we are just dealing with the effects, not addressing the real causes. Getting to the root of environmental influences on your health and your life is beginning the possibility of you achieving balance. It truly is something that we're all capable of enjoying. And over the next couple of sections here, I'm going to share with you, I'm going to teach you how these core systems in your body hold the keys to understanding why you're sick and how to navigate your way to health. So starting with my 2-3-5-8 framework, the 2 stands for the 2 questions. What do you need to add to promote healing and maintain health? And what do you need to remove that is taking away from your health? Then we go on to 3, which are the 3 phases that the balance protocol, because there really needs to be an order of things. It's super important to do things in the right order. If you think about if you are remodeling your home, you have to do things in the right order. If you just start, smashing down the walls and things like that, and then go, oh man, did anybody, get a trash receptacle out in the lawn to take away all this scrap away? If you get to cleaning and detoxing the house before you worry about nourishing and balancing other certain things, you're not going to get the same effect. So it's really important to, when you're questing for your health, through, of course, following the balance protocol is the best way. As you're questing through health, you should understand that there is a correct order to do things, and that's what I'm going to share with you. So my 3 phases are nourish, balance, and then purify. So nourish needs to really come from healthful eating, managing those environmental inputs that are coming into your environment, and then, of course, working on the mind too, empowering yourself with information, getting your body centered through different techniques of meditation and prayer and so forth, getting that mindful study going. Then we go on to balancing our lifestyle, our physical activity, our hormones. And then once we've nourished and balanced our body, then we can get into detoxification of organs and the blood and lymphatics and things like that. So when it comes down to it, understanding the order of things is super important. Then the 5 stands for what I call the 5 causes of every disease known to mankind. And I really can regulate them into one or more interrelated things of these 5. One being a nutritional deficiency. So are there things that are missing that are keeping you from attaining health? Nutrients are so vital and so powerful, we can't live without them. And so many of us don't see the emphasis of that because there's a tremendous amount of confusion in that. Just like religion and politics being so, specific. The third thing really comes to nutrition and diet. It's so taboo of a thing, and you can really bump some heads when people start talking about what's healthy or not when it comes to the nutrition world. It's pretty interesting. So nutritional deficiencies. The second thing could, of course, be stressors, stress. So these could be physical, they could be psychological, emotional, real or perceived. So some of us will experience stress in different ways, and some of us, we do really great under a high stress environment. Those of us, we can't. But though we might be tolerating or not, doesn't account for the fact that internally it's manifesting reactions down in the cellular level, also through our hormonal cascades and different things like that. Number 3 would be things like toxins. We have a very dirty world that we live in. It's really important to understand the amount of exposure that you have from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed is self-induced, but of course there's a lot of passive amount of toxic exposure too. So toxins can be biological, they can be elemental, they can be chemical. Then number 4 would be microbes. Another huge world that we live in is those of the microbes. So bacteria, fungus, virus, those are omnipresent. They're everywhere. And some of them are beneficial and a lot of them are really not. And then number 5 would be allergens. These allergens could be things, again, chemical, biological, or food. So when it really boils down to it, you've got those 5 areas that things can all be broken down into when it actually comes to causation of disease. So then we get to the 8 of the 2-3-5-8. And it's in the first key of the balance protocol that you'll find several segments that make up what I call the environmental inputs. Environmental input is a term that collectively speaks of all the things that we both choose to expose ourselves to, as well as those things that we passively are influenced by in our daily lives. Among these things, both active and passive, are our, of course, diet, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the physical environments we move our bodies through, and the psychosocial influences from our interaction with others. Traumas, both physical and psychological, microorganisms, bacteria, virus, fungi, as well as a whole spectrum of toxic chemicals we call xenobiotics. And the problem is that most people, including doctors, know very little about nutrition and even less about how and why nutrients are so essential for organ function and health. In order to optimize function and health, you have to know why, not just the what of what you're doing. You need to know the why. I certainly understand how there are just a myriad of points of views when it comes to understanding the world of nutrition. Over the years, I've seen so many different options on what nutrition is, what type of diets people should be eating in different situations, and all kinds of dietary philosophies that similarly are a set of instructions that sensationalize a certain aspect of the food world in order to gain the attention of the observer, so as to portray there's a new and better way of eating. This is simply not the case in truth. The bottom line is there has always been and always will be a foundational understanding that must be realized. This is simply put that true nutrition and healthful eating is grounded in very basic and easy to follow guidelines. I'm constantly asked, what do I think about this diet or that diet? Everything from the paleo diet to the Mediterranean diet to eating for your blood type to the Atkins to the South Beach. It never ceases to amaze me that people have lost touch with the very fact that nutrition is about eating and not dieting. Though I understand that the world uses the word diet and has become a catch-all word for putting things in one's mouth in one way or another, I've always tried to encourage my patients to think in the terms of the word eating. So it is my intent, of course, to share with you that we should get back to knowing that it's okay to eat, and that dieting is simply a word that indicates we're trying a new set of eating rules to make up for our mistakes and having not been eating healthy all the while. It's important also to understand that my views on nutrition and healthful eating are from a perspective of preventing and reversing diseases. This is where the rubber hits the road. You will not hear me speak of dieting methods to lose weight. Quite frankly, excess body weight, body fat, is a consequence of ill health. The focus should never be on losing weight. It should be on gaining health. And having that difference of understanding and where your focus will certainly guide you in a dynamically different direction once you grasp the pure and simple power of that understanding. So as I share with you my knowledge and experience in the world of nutrition, remember my goal in feeding the body is to prevent a breakdown in systems biology, optimizing function, and enhancing the enjoyment of the things we eat. What it will not be is yet another fad diet that has an agenda limiting you to just one purpose, such as to lose weight, to sell you a pre-made meal wrapped in cardboard or plastic, or some fake idea of you should look like this. A historical review of our understanding of chronic disease really does affirm that we now know that lifestyle diseases such as obesity, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, just to name a few, all have roots in poor eating and a lifestyle that doesn't make time for play and fun and activity, much less affording us enough time to rest. Then when we mix in the gene-environment connection, this is where certain genetic strengths and weaknesses are powerfully influenced by these environmental choices and gives rise to the patient's health phenotype. The phenotype is a result of the interaction of the genotype with environmental factors, eating habits, nutrients, air and water, physical exercise, psychosocial influences, again, microorganisms, environmental toxins, even trauma. And when you combine all these environmental inputs that cascade over your genetic code, you can begin to understand the influences on our metabolics and how an individual acts and feels. Genes are expressed as a consequence of the environment in which they're immersed. Environment-gene interactions give rise to the expression of disease in our culture. Pure and simple. No medicine or therapy can prevent the interaction between genes and the environment. Unfortunately, it's not possible to attack causality in many chronic diseases without dealing with multiple environmental factors. And fortunately, we do know that the outcome can be affected by modifying the environment. The trouble today is, in our disease-centered view of medicine, we are not using this information effectively to modify our approach to healthcare. We need this new primary model of addressing the prevention, management, and even resolution of chronic disease to be more focused on the individual, or that patient-centered, not disease-centered, grabbing the understanding of the interconnectivity of all these systems and realizing that we have to change our shifted view. We need to look through a different prism. Now, the central theme in functional medicine and the balance protocol is just that. So the second key of the balance protocol is optimizing gastrointestinal function and elimination. Every living organism, whether it's a cell, an organ, the whole body, or even a community of people, has to have two fundamental capacities. One is to bring substances in that provide energy and sustenance, and the other is to remove the waste. So it's inevitable to have a consequence of human biology that just comes with being alive, means we generate waste, and we do so in the body. And it's also a fact of life that we're exposed to innumerable amounts of substances that are both beneficial as well as detrimental, just by simply breathing, eating, walking, or even laying in bed. All kinds of substances are present in the food we eat, the air we breathe, in flooring, walls, everything that surrounds us. So therefore, healthy function really requires that the body differentiate between the good and the bad in our environment. And it's essential that the body can identify the substances that are necessary to maintain health and selectively take those substances into circulation, where they can nourish the cells throughout the body while keeping out the damaging materials. But to do so, the body must have protection and defense systems in place. And healthy transportation and circulation functions, as well as optimal waste, can sometimes be a challenge. And when it's not functioning correctly, we really precipitate some of the diseases that are so chronically plaguing a lot of us today. Statistically, over your lifetime, a person is going to consume 25 tons of food. If you ever think about that, it's pretty amazing. Providing the body with nutrients through digestion and absorption, you put a tremendous amount of effort on your inner tube, the outsides of your insides is what I call them. But so during this process, the body has to maintain protection from harmful organisms and toxins that accompany food. So it's a double-edged sword there. And statistically, it came out in a report from in 1999 that over 1 billion pounds of pesticides were applied in the United States. Pesticides are now ubiquitous compounds in our environment, and they can be found within your home as well as in your everyday environment. Even eating an organic diet can't guarantee the elimination of pesticides, contrary to popular belief. And it's medically substantiated that pesticide exposure is related to several types of cancers and leukemias and multiple myelomas and mutations of cells in almost every organ in the human body. Even conditions such as diabetes and Parkinson's disease, asthma, hypothyroidism, all of these are related to environmental exposures to toxic substances, and of course reactions to things that we consume, such as glutens and things like that for some people. So, when these start to accumulate and become stored in the body, that's when we start to have dysfunction there on the cellular level. Even pharmacological drugs can be found in measurable levels in our rivers and drinking water, soil sediments, and things like that. So these are definitely coming through our bodies and being eliminated, and then, of course, being kept in the environment. So sometimes people don't really realize this circle of life, if you will, when it comes to things that we consume and then excrete, still maintain a presence that now gets to be negatively impacting on other organisms. So clearly the ability to protect against these damaging substances must be part of a healthy digestion and absorption process, as well as a healthy ability to eliminate those. We have a lot of people with food allergies alone that can be immediately felt through certain IgE-mediated immune responses, or even delayed responses like immunoglobulin G or IgG-mediated. So food allergies and intolerances account for another diverse range of symptoms, all the way from migraines to skin problems, psoriasis, cardiovascular effects, and of course, tangibly there in the digestive tract, leading to certain disorders that are so common that we see as well. So all these examples have in common that the body has to differentiate the good from the bad. So selectively identifying those substances that are necessary for our existence, those nutrients, water, oxygen, beneficial microbes, from those that are not beneficial and those that actually can become detrimental. And after this first step of recognition, the body must selectively absorb and transport those substances to get to our cells, and then, of course, eliminating the byproduct of our cells respirating or actually metabolizing those nutrients. So in with the new and out with the old is really super important when taking a look at the body. So having a healthy gastrointestinal system means more to you than just not being annoyed by a little bloating or heartburn or occasional constipation. It is absolutely central to your entire health, and it's connected to everything that happens in your body. Everything. That's why almost always when I work with patients, I start helping them by optimizing gastrointestinal function, healing the gut, and things of that nature. So we have to really treat chronic health problems starting internally in that particular system. And of course, that starts first and foremost by sending healthful foods through the pipes to begin with. And later on, I'll talk a little bit more about when it starts coming out the other side. So key number 3 to the balance protocol is to calm and develop the mind. The vast majority of science today gives attention to the effects on human health of various well-known and often well-researched biological and physical factors and their interaction with the individual's gene predispositions. But I believe what's missing is a strong attention to the psychosocial realm, which incidentally has a very strong source of prolific research and a whole myriad of books and articles written about common and uncommon clinical approaches. We have to take an opportunity to turn our attention to the impact of things like spirituality as one of the keys to building the true blocks of health. And understanding the role of biochemical individuality, again, our genetic predisposition and our environment, definitely is going to be defined by our individual emotional and psychological and the health of our mindset to bring about a total mind, body, spirit type of connection. And one of the great things about functional medicine in that patient-centered model of care is the fact that it states that medicine of today involves more than just the physical matter based in the body. It also includes the spiritual and social experience of the patient. And as the changing research record really indicates, is there's an understanding of the role of spirituality in health and healing is attracting considerable amount of attention in the last couple decades. For example, if you can search the National Library of Medicine database using the word spirituality, it'll show you that there's only about and a little over 60 published on that subject in the years between 1970 and 1990, compared to 400, almost 500 articles between 1990 and 2000. And then that's even doubled to over 1,200 articles from '02 to '04. So a lot more attention is coming to this connection to our mind and spirituality and its impact on health. This increased interest was triggered by studies such as that of a couple of docs, researchers King and Bushwick, in which it was noted that 94% of patients admitted to hospitals believe that spiritual health is as important as physical health. And 77% believe that physicians should consider their patients' spiritual needs. But the interesting thing was that only 20% of patients reported their physicians actually addressing those mind or spiritual issues with them in more than just a passing fashion. And then, of course, there in 2003, there was a study which physicians were asked about their attitudes and preferences regarding spirituality and the medical encounter. And they found that almost 85% indicated that they should be aware of the patient's spirituality, but most would not ask about those type of issues unless the patient was in the process of passing away. So in discussions on the role of spirituality in health, certain docs like Levin, they make a particular assertion, and the quote goes, by excluding matters of spirit from clinical research and practice, physicians run the risk of leaving out a large piece of what it means to be a human being. If the physician sincerely wishes to treat the whole person, they first have to set their patients as more than just a body and a personality, or worse, a collection of isolated organ systems. So I think that's a powerful statement to the fact that it's one of those things where it's super important. Most of us will really agree, but nothing is really done on making that a part of the process. Well, of course, the Balance Protocol changes all that. So given the importance of the subject to patients and practitioners alike, it's really valuable to spend a little time exploring some new findings that suggest that there may be a physical and biochemical basis for spirituality. And interestingly enough, is other building blocks to health and biological connection appears to be experienced differently by each of us in our own way. So spirituality, some people define it in so many different ways, or our experience of the divine, if you will, is another example of how all show biochemical individuality. So it ties back in that way as well. But of course, more research is needed in that particular area, and more clearly how our spirituality and life experiences meet our physical bodies and are intertwined in such a manner that ignoring one means leaving out the other part of the web. Key number 4 to the Balance Protocol is to clear inflammation and support immunity. And here I can only give a little primer on inflammation biology, but basically describes a mechanism of innate and acquired immunity and the key players in what we call the inflammatory response and the connections between those. I agree that the entire spectrum of inflammatory diseases represents host defenses gone awry. Your body's immune system really trying to thwart off some of the things that we've already talked about here earlier in the podcast. And a number of cardiovascular conditions, but many things that we have commonly seen when it comes to inflammation are in that cardiovascular area. They really do involve a component of inflammation. There's no disputing that. And it really represents a host defense mechanism that can cause disease. And assessing your level of inflammation really begins with a very few simple blood tests. And these can measure the degree of even hidden inflammation in your body. And this is really important because almost every modern disease is caused by or affected by some level of inflammation, and most of the time it's hidden. So things such as heart disease, obesity, cancer, Parkinson's, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, allergies, they all have an inflammatory component. If your immune system and your ability to balance the inflammatory forces in your body are impaired, you're literally standing on the edge of a very tall cliff, and you're headed towards illness and premature aging more rapidly than you can imagine. So By addressing the causes of inflammation and learning how to live an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, it really does and can lead you to balance. And everyone who's ever had a sore throat or a rash or a sprained ankle knows inflammation. Those are normal, appropriate responses of our defense system to infection or trauma. And we need inflammation to help facilitate the reactions we need to heal and survive. The trouble occurs when that defense system runs out of control. It's kind of like a rebel army bent on destroying its own country. Most people are familiar with overactive immune responses and too much inflammation in common conditions like allergies and arthritis and asthma. But few people know that hidden inflammation is at the root of all chronic illness, such as diabetes, or what I call diabesity and obesity, heart disease, depression, cancer, and even autism. The real concern is not our acute response to injury, infection, or insult, but the chronic smoldering inflammation that slowly destroys our organs and our ability to optimize function and leads to rapid degeneration of our organs. We may feel healthy, but if this inflammation is raging inside of us, then we have a ticking time bomb. Common treatments such as anti-inflammatory drugs like the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories of ibuprofen, aspirin, acetaminophen, or even some of the big heavy hitters of prednisone, those often are very useful in acute problems, but they interfere with the body's own immune response and can lead inevitably to serious and deadly side effects. And as many people die from taking anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen every year as due from asthma or leukemia. It's pretty amazing to think of that. So stopping the use of these drugs would be the equivalent to finding a cure for both. So what is the best way to control inflammation while we're still upstream? Firstly, we identify the triggers and the causes of inflammation, and then help the body's natural immune balance reset by providing the right conditions for it to thrive. If inflammation and immune balances are at the root of most modern disease, which they are, how do we find the causes and get the body back into balance? Thankfully, there's a list of things that can cause inflammation, and it's relatively short. So if you take a look at poor eating, which is mostly sugar and refined flours and processed food, inflammatory fats such as trans fats. The saturated fats are fantastic for you, contrary to popular belief. We'll talk about that in later podcasts. Foods that at the time in our lives are inappropriate. When you're sick and ill, you don't snuggle up with a burger and fries and a Coke and lay in bed. We want healthful things then. So of course, if we are seemingly healthful but eating those things, are we really serving the body the same way? Another pro-inflammatory activity is lack of exercise or over-exercise. Inappropriate levels of stress, hidden and chronic infections of virus, bacteria, yeast, even parasites. Then we have hidden allergens from food or the environment. And then, of course, toxins such as mercury and pesticide and cadmium and things of that nature. The solution is to find those inflammatory factors unique to each person and their environment, and to see how various lifestyle and environmental or infectious factors spin the immune system out of control, leading to a whole host of chronic illnesses. Carefully listening to a person's own story and a new way of using cutting edge functional laboratory assessments that we have now give us specific tests to help me find the cause in most people. And it's really important to understand that this concept of inflammation is not specific to any one organ or medical specialty. In fact, if you read a medical journal from any of the specialties, you will find endless articles about how inflammation is at the root of the problem. The issue is the lack of communication between specialists. Everyone is treating the downstream effects of inflammation instead of addressing the cause. So multiple problems that are all really linked together by inflammation. So take, for example, it's really common for me to see someone on about 15 medications for about 5 different inflammatory conditions, ranging from prediabetes to asthma to reflux to irritable bowel to hypertension, autoimmune diseases. And what is interesting is that sometimes when I ask them how they feel, they say, fine. I tell them that, well, I'm really surprised because I see you're on so many medications. And then they'll say something like, but everything is very well controlled with all these latest medications given to me by these highly trained and board certified specialists. Well, it's entirely true that someone like this has seen a specialist in every field. A lung doctor for their asthma, a gastroenterologist for their colitis and reflux, the cardiologist for their high blood pressure, the endocrinologist for their prediabetes or diabetes, and then throw in the dermatologist for hair loss and skin problems. And I ask these patients, with all these top specialists they see, did anyone ask them why they had 5 different inflammatory diseases and why their immune system was so ticked off? Was it just bad luck, or that they got all these diseases, or did they catch them, or was there something really connecting all these problems? And just about everyone looks at me puzzled and says, no one's ever asked me those things. So when I search for and find the causes of these problems, I find things such as undiagnosed bacterial infections in the intestines, things like gluten allergies, poor fatty acid status, heavy metal toxicities, nutrient deficiencies abound, of course. And so I proceed to teach them how to live the balanced protocol. And 6 months later, they come back, they're pounds lighter, blood pressure's regulated out, no more asthma, no more reflux, the bowels work fantastic, no more colitis. And then they report to me for the first time that they're in their life that their hair was growing back, and subsequently they were off nearly most of all those medications, if not all of them altogether. So now the greatest part is not the fact that we were able to sort through all the interconnections of these multiple systems producing this broad spectrum of quote-unquote diseases, but it's the fact that when the balanced protocol is applied, the body is able to do all that work spontaneously. That brings us to key number 5 of the balanced protocol, which is to strengthen musculoskeletal. And when discussing the structural aspect of the balanced protocol, we commonly think of just muscle skeletal system, but it's really appropriate to understand that since the majority of the body is comprised of bones, muscles, and interconnecting joints that form our limbs and torso and neck, there are also structural considerations that are also relevant for several non-muscle skeletal conditions. In some of my patients, aspects of their structural imbalances or quote-unquote structural dysfunction may be readily apparent and obviously relevant to their primary concern, but other times they're not, and we're more concerned with the structure of internal things such as cells or organ tissues. So in other words, structural imbalance may be more subtle and or less obvious than the relevant, apparent clinical situation. It's important to distinguish subtle from unimportant, and many structural imbalances and dysfunctions may go undetected or may be categorized as non-relevant if they lie outside a particular practitioner's awareness or scope of training or specialty. Examples of these important subtleties and branches of structural integrity include little slight increases in intestinal permeability associated with inflammatory bowel disease or eczema or several types of arthritis, and the defects and subtle aberrations of joint motion, and that these may contribute to chronic back and neck pain and predispose a person to recurrent injury. The more we know about the micro and macro physiology, the more we're able to challenge when attempting to draw clear boundaries between organ systems and biochemical versus nutritional versus structural versus neurological processes. It's really increasingly clear that all musculoskeletal conditions involve numerous overlaps with other elements of the balanced protocol framework. The best way to convey the interconnectivity of these structural aspects of this framework with these other elements is simply to discuss and give examples of each with an appropriation of the bidirectional linkage whereby one aspect affects the other. The sections that I've already detailed kind of provide a review of that aspect of the framework, but subtle structural dysfunction can lead to clinical conditions of sufficient severity that intervention is warranted. And in addition to deficits in functions that contribute to low back and low extremity pain and injury, are subtle restrictions and or excesses of joint mobility, particularly of the spinal column. These too may lead to chronic pain. This approach is particularly relevant with patients with, for example, chronic back pain, where deficits and imbalances in muscular strength and tension can be alleviated by multi-component interventions. That's a fancy term for possibly getting some chiropractic medicine or spinal manipulation, physical therapy, targeted muscle strengthening and stretching. And of course, feeding the body the nutrients and the building blocks it needs to repair. So we have that dietary connection. Key number 6 to the balance protocol is boosting energy metabolism. The tiny cellular organelles we have in all our cells virtually are called mitochondria, and they're present in almost all the cells, with predominance in highly more metabolically active cells such as skeletal or cardiac muscle and the nervous system. And the relationship between the mitochondria and the cell in which they reside is a unique interdependence and has a lot to teach about the importance principles of energy and what we call oxidative stress and their importance within the balance protocol, because biochemical processes that occur within the mitochondria are known as, some fancy terms here, oxidative phosphorylation, or the respiratory chain of ATP production, citric acid cycle, yada yada. But it's important to remember that many other functions also take place inside the mitochondria. In a simplified and layman's term, the mitochondria are basically small organelles within the cells that are responsible for various complex metabolic reactions. And the bottom line is they manufacture energy for the tissues of the organs in which they reside. The whole role of your metabolism is to take oxygen we breathe and the food we eat and process it to make energy, fuel for life. Just like, the fuel for your car is gas, the fuel for your body is manufactured in the mitochondria. And so if you're tired or feel worn out, you don't, have the energy to kind of, your get up and go has kind of gone away, your muscles are sore, your brain fog, you might have a metabolic burnout. Your mitochondria might be dysfunctional. But remember, the key is to ask and find out why. Imagine if you could find a way to tune up your metabolism and to increase the amount of energy you have. I think we all want some more of that. To be able to think clearly and feel less achy. Imagine if you could prevent diabetes, heart disease, Parkinson's, and depression. Imagine if you could heal fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndromes. Imagine if you could get to the root of aging and slow the whole process down and eliminate most of those age-related diseases. Well, all of that is possible by giving yourself a metabolic makeover, so to speak, a metabolic tune-up, and you can do this by utilizing the balance protocol. Fatigue is the most common symptom of poorly functioning mitochondria. We need to keep those mitochondria in top shape to really thwart off fatigue. And the reason we run out of energy and reduce our stamina as we age is the constant insult and injury we give our mitochondria. We have over 100,000 trillion of these powerhouses in our body, and each one contains about 17,000 little assembly lines for making ATP, our major fuel. And they use over 90% of the oxygen that we breathe. They take up 40% of the space inside of heart cells. The only problem is they are very sensitive to damage, and the injury is from uncontrolled oxidative stress, which results from toxic insults, infections, allergens, stress, those things that we've already covered here in the 5 causes, and or just eating too much poor, quality food. And a lot of research has been done in this regard. One of the big names out there is, of course, Dr. Bruce Ames. He's one of the most cited doctors actually out there. And he is actually from the University of California, Berkeley. And he spent the last decade discovering how we actually give ourselves a metabolic tune-up, working with rats and giving them different molecules and things. And he actually really found that by giving simple compounds of nutrients like alpha-lipoic acid and acetyl-L-carnitine, just to name a couple, could actually do that. And overnight, these rats that he was working with actually became younger. They got up on the treadmills themselves, and they swam long distances and all kinds of fun stuff. Well, how could that happen? Well, he simply gave the cells the raw material they needed for optimal function. And as we age, our metabolism burns out from a lifetime of damage and insults. But what's amazing is it's very forgiving when we're penitent, so to speak, and we give it the things that it needs. So we ask those two questions: what do we need to add? What do we need to take away? And so again, the way to get healthy is to live the balance protocol. It's that simple. Ultimately, we can give ourselves a metabolic tune-up. Then key number 7 is to balance your hormones and your neurotransmitters. The health of the human organism is determined by its flexibility in responding to its environment and by balancing between the breakdown in the use of functional and structural chemicals and their replacement. This essential process is basically metabolism and, of course, hormonal cycles. Response to the environment is determined primarily by the information obtained through our senses and then, of course, mediated by the brain and hypothalamus. We call this the adrenal side. Well, those are chemicals. Those are hormones. And then the information obtained from food or other environmental exposures mediated by the immune system and some of our organs like the pancreas and liver, which we'll refer to as the insulin side, it has their messaging to the inner workings of how the body is connected and regulated. And the research literature is flooded with interesting examples of these interconnective functions between them. Biological function can be broadly conceptualized into reactions of approach or avoidance. You can kind of think of it like that. So negative sensory information from the environment, like fear, it leads to an avoidance reaction that involves withdrawal, contraction, shutting down growth and reproduction. And of course, it's mediated by our stress hormones, our stress adaptation from the adrenal glands, adrenaline and cortisol. It's primarily activating for that fight or flight. So cortisol, for instance, is primarily suppressive of the immune system, of the brain, as in depression, and even of growth of bone, as in osteoporosis. And then on the positive environmental sensory information, or on the attraction side, this allows for growth and reproduction and is represented by the hormone insulin, which allows for growth and storage of energy. Insulin interacts with all kinds of other trophic hormones, including the estrogens, testosterone, DHEA, and even the thyroid. And these balance adrenaline and cortisol in different ways. Insulin actually is triggered both by environmental signals, so the presence of food in our inner tube, and by internal signals of glucose status. In other words, when it's low, it creates certain reactions too. So making sure that we understand that the major hormones appear to have a really critical role in maintaining life and balancing metabolism. But by themselves would not provide the flexibility in response to the environment that has characterized us humans. The minor hormones provide a much higher degree of flexibility. Once we have a better understanding of how these hormones interact with each other to balance metabolism and respond to a changing environment, we can design treatment strategies that are consistent with the body's attempt to create longevity and avoid some of the missteps previously made with regard to hormone replacement therapy. There's been some of that in the past that wasn't really productive and turned out, well, we really shouldn't be giving these synthetic conjugated estrogens or progestins, but at the time that was the best that was available. But now, of course, we have greater science and studies in regards to bioidentical forms of these hormones, and of course, in the anti-aging world, really has provided a tremendous amount of insight into optimizing these hormonal functions. So hormone balance adds yet another layer of complexity to understanding the physiological function versus malfunction in our bodies. And in order to apply the concepts of genomics in disease primarily affected by hormonal imbalances, we need to follow these hormone molecules through their life cycles to describe both their balance and imbalance. Well, the balance protocol gives a systemized approach to doing that. So that brings us to our last key, which is to enhance detoxification. The concept that toxins accumulate in the body and are the cause of various health problems has long been a fundamental tenet of traditional healthcare systems around the world. For centuries, societies have valued therapies that have promoted the idea of cleansing and detoxifying. From the simple water fast used since antiquity to sometimes elaborate detoxifying regimens of spas, saunas, even enemas, hydrotherapy treatments, dietary modifications, detoxification as a therapeutic goal really has long been pursued. And in the 21st century, as society has increasingly been exposed to toxic compounds in our air, water, and food, it has become really apparent that an individual's ability to detoxify substances to which they've been exposed, both exogenously or from the outside and endogenously or products of metabolism, is really critical, important to overall health. And many of the chemicals which were exposed show little relationship to previously encountered compounds or metabolites, and yet healthy bodies are often capable of managing these environmental exposures through complex systems of detoxification enzymes. It's pretty doggone remarkable. But that economy, if you will, that metabolic economy, has its needs of things that you need to add and help it take away. Well, public acknowledgement regarding the extent of environmental exposure to chemicals and xenobiotics is at an all-time high. For example, the EPA estimates that back in the early or mid-90s, so 1994, alone, over 2.2 billion pounds of toxic chemicals were released into the environment in the United States alone. And then it estimates for 2002, it's grown to 4.7 billion pounds. This adds up to a statistic that is that it's likely that at least 25% of the U.S. population suffers to some extent from these chemicals and even heavy metal poisoning. The complex systems of detoxification enzymes in the body generally function adequately to minimize these potential damage from these, but over time they will lose their function. And common dysfunction can occur when these systems are overloaded or imbalanced. And studies have suggested now that there's a direct association between the body's ability to radically transform these toxic metabolites and xenobiotics and the etiology of all kinds of puzzling diseases. And these chronic things like fibromyalgia and multiple chemical sensitivities are at the top of that list. So researchers also began to validate this hypothesis that chronic neurological symptoms with diseases like Parkinson's result from impaired detoxification ability. And in many cases, cancer has been shown to be due to compromised ability to get rid of these toxic substances. So then there's, of course, as we study the human genome, we're seeing that we can turn genes on and off with nutrients, but they can also be caused to turn on or with this exposure to these toxic environments. So it really presents a challenge even down to our very DNA. And research is emerging all the time that casts doubt on earlier findings and opens up new avenues for further discussion and investigation in this area. Linking detoxification to specific disease in a research study is really impossible with today's tools, since detoxification enzyme systems are so complex and they're so individualized. And most clinical trials try to isolate down to just this one aspect of something so they can either verify it or not. And that's the difficulty with science in general, is that the body is far more complex than just one particular isolated mechanism. So we've got lots to think about when it comes to understanding that particular impact of us gaining a further understanding of these systems. And as in countless other areas of medicine, however, clinicians must still make decisions for their patients in light of the best information available. So we have new cutting-edge functional assessment tools that are available to us now to significantly enhance our understanding of the biochemical processes and differences between individuals. These tools really allow clinicians to quantifiably and quantitatively analyze the body's ability to adequately detox these compounds which is exposed to. And additionally, as our understanding of the underlying biochemical mechanisms involved in the regulation and nutritional support of detox system continues to deepen, these connections to disease are becoming clearer, and clinicians are gaining a better understanding of how to develop therapeutic detoxification programs. So we covered a whole lot of things in this particular broadcast, but the take home here is what the Balance Protocol is and how powerful it can be once you start living it. Using it as a template that you can always have in your mind at the ready. When you or a loved one has symptoms and you don't know where to start or how to find the answer to resolving it, you simply can run through the Balance Protocol's 2-3-5-8 framework. Ask yourself the two questions. What do I need to replace that's missing? What do I need to remove that's standing in the way? Then make sure you proceed in with going in the correct order. Focus first and foremost on nourishing the body and nourishing the mind and get your strength up. At the same time, you literally recruit all your body's systems to come to your aid with this particular love and nourishing. Then you go on to balance your immune system and inflammation. Get your body moving and structurally fortified. Balance your energy making capacity and hormones. And once you've shored up your body and gotten your biochemistry back in working order, then you can move on to purifying your organ systems and helping them take out the trash and remodel. While seeking the root causes, simply turn to evaluating the 5 causes of disease: nutritional deficiencies, physical and emotional stresses, toxic compound exposures, microbial infections, and allergies in what we eat and what we live in. And realize that you just have to be a CSI agent for yourself. And all of that investigative work and then applying it to the 8 systems utilizing the keys of the Balance Protocol is very simple and very powerful. Okay, so again, the promise of the Balance Protocol is by applying this powerful framework, you will see that simple efforts can afford you high levels of well-being, perpetuate longevity, prevent disease, and even resolve chronic illness. Because at the end of the day, it's you. You are the only person who can make you healthy. Well, I really enjoyed sharing this podcast with you, and thank you so much for spending the time with me. For more information on the Balance Protocol or to join the Balance Nation, please head over to my website, dranthonygbeck.com. You can also find me on facebook.com/dranthonygbeck. And lastly, if you would be so kind and take a few seconds and leave me a review on iTunes, I'd surely love you for it. And so until next time, remember, let's live life in balance.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. Thank you for listening to the Balance Protocol podcast. Be sure to head over to dranthonygbeck.com, where you'll find lots of life-changing information that will educate, motivate, and inspire you to your highest levels of well-being. There, you can get access to exclusive content, as well as download your 100% free Urgent Health Report. You can also use the contact page to ask your health questions and make requests for topics you would like covered on future podcasts. Until then, let's live life in balance.